Hello YouTube family, coming at you with a slightly different pace of video today, but one that's really close to my heart, a topic that's really close to my heart and has been really alive in my heart recently, and it's about death and grief and the powerful portal for expansion and opening I believe and have experienced they provide. And this is inspired by a very raw day that I had yesterday. Yesterday was the 10-year death anniversary of my father. So a little bit about my story. My dad died when I was 17. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was 12 or 13 years old. And then there was this several-year journey of his body slowly breaking down. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease, so you lose motor functioning skills, you lose control of your body, which was insane to witness because my dad was always, in my eyes, like a picture of health. He was that guy who was up at 3 a.m. swimming laps in the pool at the Y, and a sports coach his whole life, and very health oriented and very encouraging of my athletics and health and fitness. And it was just insane to see him lose his life force, to witness that dwindle from his vessel when he had always been so full of life force. And as tragic as that was, there was this beautiful, inexplicable softening that I got to witness in my dad as he was coming to terms with losing his life, having to let go, literally like let go of his capacity to control his life. And my dad was always very loving and gregarious and warm, but he was quite a stubborn, like firm, my way or the highway kind of person. And I would get moments of his softness, but hands down, it was in those last couple of years, and especially the last few months of his life, that I probably had the most beautiful moments that I ever had with him throughout my whole childhood. Because there was this softening as he was coming to terms with his death. There was this cracking open in his heart, in his spirit, as he was getting closer and closer to death. And I have some moments with him that I will never forget, that have deeply shaped who I am today in those last months of his life. And witnessing him meet death and prepare for death taught me so much about God, taught me so much about faith, taught me so much about forgiveness, taught me so much about like loving people for their imperfections and loving them for all that they are, but also for all that they're not, and seeing that we're all literally just humans here doing our best. And when my dad died, there was this powerful opening in my life, which I don't know how happened. I don't know how it happened. Maybe it was the grace of being a 18-year-old spirited and ready to take on the world, but I felt it. The day that my dad died, I felt this rush of energy in my spirit. There was deep grief, there was confusion, there was loss, there was fear, and there was this encouragement, there was this opening to lean into life. And I know a huge part of that was fused from my father, from his spirit fusing with mine and inviting me to go forth and to live and to expand my wings and to not let this collapse and crush me, but to open through it. And those were some of the last conversations we had before he died. I was in a place in my life where, I was graduating high school. I loved studying, I loved being a student. I have a very strong intellectual side, and I love feeding that side of me. And there was a deeper calling to see the world. I wanted to take a gap year. I wanted to travel to New Zealand and Australia, and I wanted to go learn about life a bit more from my own lens before putting myself in school. And he was so encouraging. I can remember some moments where he just stared in my eyes and he's like, go chase it all, like make it happen, do it. Go, Kelly, like it's too small for you here, like go. And when he died, when he passed over, I felt this rush of energy in my spirit to go after my heart's desires, to grab life by the heart and to lean in and to choose life and to trust myself. And I felt his spirit right alongside me. And I did. And that opened up a 10-year chapter of me being incredibly nomadic. And I took myself to New Zealand. I scraped up every penny I could working 4 jobs. I never really had a lot of help from my family. My family, I love them, but financial and physical support was never really available in any way. Busted my butt so I could get to New Zealand. And as soon as I got there, my whole world cracked open in ways that I could have never imagined. I found myself in biodynamic permaculture farms, and then at these rainbow gatherings, and then sitting in 10-day silent meditation retreats and having my first medicine ceremony out on the land, and just connecting with these people from all walks of life and understanding there was so much more than I had previously known available, and all at 18 years old. And it opened up this powerful chapter of spiritual growth, of inevitable healing, of, the loss and the death that had happened, and having to really face that head on, and feeling grateful to have mentors and therapists and teachers and counselors and healers to work with that and to deepen in that and to be invited to go deeper in. It's when I started learning astrology and studying astrology. It's when I found out about Tantra and sacred sexuality and feminine and masculine energy. It's when I had my first experience of true divine union and coming into a soulmate relationship that also shifted the trajectory of my life in a beautiful way. So much opened through the death of my father. And it could have not gone that way, right? Like, when we face death, and let's just use physical death as an example, because this is my story. My dad softened. He cracked open to God at the end of his life. He let himself be cracked open, and he let me see that. Even though maybe, I was young, like, he let me see that. He said a lot of beautiful truths at the end of his life. And we had this very healing connection in those last few months. And he cracked open. He let himself be opened through the inevitable death of physical life that he was approaching. And he imparted that wisdom onto me as his daughter. And when my father passed physically, right, there's always ways that things can go. And so maybe it's karmic, maybe it's choice, maybe it's free will, I don't know. I could have collapsed, right? I could have collapsed into grief. I could have stayed stuck in the grief. I could have refused to go and follow my heart and open through the grief. I could have collapsed in the grief and attached to the grief and let the grief get really dense in my system. But I knew that wasn't going to serve me, and I knew that was not what my dad would have wanted. So I said yes. I said, wow, I am cracked open, but while I'm open, let me see what God can bring me from this space. Maybe I wasn't thinking it at the time at 18, but looking back, I can see that's what was happening metaphysically and emotionally and on a spirit level. I think that these wisdoms, right, it's not that some of us are wise and some of us aren't. We are all inherently wise. It's just the capacity to which we open up and let it touch us. And with grief is painful, right? Especially when it's death. And I'm talking about death of a loved one, but this could be something you experience in death of a chapter of your life, or a relationship, or a residence, or a job title that meant a lot to you. When there's death, it can feel like there's a loss. And we might want to collapse in that and get depressed in that and sink into that and let it become this like bottomless pit that then becomes this hungry ghost that is unconsciously seeking and seeking and seeking and never going within to really feel it, to really meet the grief, to meet the depth. And I believe that when there is a big loss in our life, there is an opening. And we either get to see that opening as a pit of despair or as a launching pad for grace, a launching pad for God, a launching pad for more life to come in, right? Like the God-sized hole in our hearts, the God-sized wound. We're not meant to fill it. We're meant to open through it. And there were a lot of unknowns in my life at that time. But through my father's spirit and through my own spirit and through trust, I opened through that hurt and allowed life to move me in a deep way. And it set me on this catapult, a powerful catapult of a trajectory that I could have never imagined for my life, and that has served me so deeply. I started 3 businesses in these last 10 years. I learned how to be self-sufficient and create my own schedule and lifestyle. I've lived in 20 different countries. I have experienced so much of life. And I know that was catalyzed from the powerful trajectory of that 10 years was catalyzed from the death of my father. Amidst death, there was rebirth. Amidst a catastrophic ending, there was a powerful new beginning, if I chose it. And I had a really raw day yesterday, I'm not gonna lie. I've already integrated so much around my dad's death, but I think there's something about losing a parent really young that it's always gonna touch you in a different way. You know, it's always gonna hit a different place in your heart. And I'm grateful for it because it's being cracked open to the beauty of life. It doesn't feel like a chain on my ankle. It feels like a liberation on my heart to feel more and to lean in more and to open more. And I had this moment yesterday where I was sitting in the town that he grew up in. I biked over. I'm currently visiting my hometown, and it felt really important to come back for this anniversary, this 10-year anniversary, and to make it special. And I had this moment where I was sitting in the town that he grew up in, where he used to take us as kids, me and my siblings, and I was reflecting on a different death that I'm approaching right now in my life. It's not the loss of him. He's a very integrated part of my reality now. But there was a chapter in my life that opened up. When he passed, there was a strong trajectory that I set out on. And 10 years later, I feel that closing in a way. I feel this tapering of life force of something that used to really define who Kelly was. You know, like Kelly on her maiden journey, discovering who she is, going after what she wants in life, and climbing every mountain and having every experience. And although that's always going to be a part of who I am, I feel this deepening taking place in my psyche, and this call to a new adventure of a different frequency and flavor, and a simultaneous grief of letting go of this chapter that has been, and how I have seen myself and relationships that filled that chapter, and titles that filled that chapter, and dispositions that filled that chapter, and ways of being and moving through the world that filled that chapter, and feeling how I've outgrown them in a way, and that they're asking to be shed and sacrificed for new growth. And had this very powerful moment yesterday of feeling this integration of how death is so much more than physical loss. Death is a vital step on the pathway of growth. Without death, there is not opening. Without closure, there is not opening. Without grief, there is not ecstasy. They are so inherently interwoven. And if I avoid that grief of, if I had avoided the grief of my father and just burrowed it down and collapsed, I wouldn't have gone on to weave the life I wove and to open my heart to life and the people I've met in the way I did. I let it serve as an opening. And now in this place where a certain chapter of my life is coming to a close and making way for a new one, I can avoid that grief and try to just play out the old stories and play out the old ways, or I can offer them up to God. I can offer them up to the altar of divinity. I can offer them up and say, okay, you can take this too. I've been here before and I know what to do. And I'm not going to avoid the pain, but I'm going to open through it. I'm not going to collapse. And in that, I felt the spirit of my father, and how, maybe I'm getting too deep here, I don't care. I've reflected on this a lot, especially the last few years, as I've really deepened an understanding of what does the father mean? And I believe that was a huge initiation in me having to let go of my physical father so young, was to understand my relationship to the greater father of existence, of creation, of consciousness, of life. yes, and we have our physical parents in this lifetime. So I had my physical father whose DNA I carry, whose life force and spirit I carry, whose probably shadows and pain in the ass qualities I carry, and also beauty and uniqueness I carry. And he was my physical father. But there is a spiritual father. There is a guiding force of the father. And although I love my father for all that he was and for all that he wasn't, I know he is not like the highest template of masculinity for me. I had to go on a journey of deeply understanding, what does masculinity mean for me? And where do I see that in the world? And where is that within myself? And how can I call that forward in my own life? And how can I have reverence and respect for the masculine in the world? What does it mean to be in relationship with the masculine? I really had to go on that journey. And it's an ever evolving one. And I do believe a very strong quality of the father and masculinity is the ability to call things as they are, to have right relationships in life, to know what to feed and to know in a way what to starve, to know what to follow in integrity and to know what is extracting from your life force or detracting from your life force, to be able to be discerning, to be able to have integrity, to be able to walk the walk you came here to walk in life, and to do that in a good way, and to reorient and have discipline and devotion to that. And I'm feeling this deeper integration of masculinity within myself. And I feel threads of my father, and a lot of the lessons he taught me and things he taught me through all that he was and wasn't, but this higher octave now of this chapter, this last 10-year chapter of my maidenhood in a way, of my wild and passionate and devotional to my heart's truth maidenhood, evolving into this new octave of womanhood and establishing an even greater relationship with the father and what that means. And seeing my physical, biological father as a key part in that, but not the only part. So there's a lot integrating there. And I'm so grateful for the pain of grief and for the teachings of death and for the opening that death provides. Because without it, I don't think we would have the energy to transform. I'm not saying that I think things should always be painful and that we should be in these death processes all the time, or that I'm grateful my dad died. Of course not. But life is how we receive it and then move forward with it. And I think the parts that are crunchier and more raw and painful and challenging bring this catalytic fuel for transformation if we use it and utilize it as an opening for God, as an opening for truth, as an opening for love and honesty. So this is my long share. If you stayed to the end, that really means a lot to me. I'd love to hear anything you want to share below. If you have had some experiences recently with death and grief and have experienced them as a portal for opening, a portal for expansion. I think we're in a time right now, I feel like a lot of my friends, a lot of the clients I'm working with, there seems to be, and I know this is such a woo-woo astrologer girl with a nose ring thing to say, there's a lot dying. There's a lot of death and rebirth happening right now in people's lives. And maybe you're in that confusing bardo where you're not quite reborn, but you're not quite where you were. Or maybe you're actively stepping forward into this new timeline or expression of yourself or chosen pathway. Wherever you're at, I think this is very prominent on the planet right now. So I felt right to share from my heart of my own experience and lessons I've integrated over the years and some things that have deeply touched and shaped me. So I'd love to hear if you have any comments or reflections of your own below, and I really appreciate you for hearing my story.